There's a secret Michael Jackson carried to his final breath, a truth so delicate that even those closest to him only whispered about it in the shadows. For more than 50 years, one woman remained at the center of his heart, shaping his art, his choices, and even his family. She wasn't just a mentor, she wasn't just a friend. In his own words, she was mother, sister, and something else he never dared define. He lived under the world's brightest spotlight, yet guarded this connection in silence, until piece by piece the truth began to unravel. And when it did, it shook everything we thought we knew about Michael Jackson and Diana Ross. Michael Jackson was just 9 years old the first time he met Diana Ross. It was a Motown gathering, the kind of event where every glance felt like judgment and every second carried the weight of expectation. The Jackson 5 were still new to the label, standing small and uncertain among polished stars. Michael, the youngest of the group, stayed close to his brothers, his wide eyes betraying nerves as he tried to appear strong. And then Diana appeared. She wasn't just another performer, she was already the face of Motown, elegant, self-assured, and admired by millions. Yet instead of ignoring the timid boy in the corner, she walked right up to him. She bent down, looked him directly in the eyes, and with a warmth that cut through all the noise, she simply called him sweetheart. That moment marked the beginning of something Michael could never fully explain. For him, Diana became more than an idol. She was the first person in that intimidating world who made him feel safe. She didn't see him as a product or as the youngest cog in the Jackson 5 machine. She saw him as a child who needed reassurance, and that single act of kindness anchored itself deep within him. Years later, when asked to describe what she meant to him, Michael would call her mother, sister, and lover, all in one. It wasn't a simple bond. It wasn't maternal in the traditional sense, nor was it just admiration. It was an attachment that blurred lines, shaped by the loneliness of fame and the rare comfort she offered him. When Diana launched her own television special in 1971, she brought Michael on stage beside her. What the audience didn't know was that she had spent hours teaching him how to move with confidence, how to smile without trembling, how to make the spotlight feel like home. He wasn't performing for the cameras that night. He was performing for her belief in him. For Michael, meeting Diana Ross wasn't just the start of a friendship. It was the beginning of the one connection that would quietly define his entire life. By 1978, Michael Jackson was no longer the shy 9-year-old who once trembled backstage at Motown. He was 20, caught between childhood fame and the uncertain identity of adulthood. That year, he accepted the role of the Scarecrow in The Wiz, a bold reimagining of The Wizard of Oz featuring an all-black cast. For the public, it was just another project. For Michael, it was something far greater, a chance to be near Diana Ross day after day, away from the usual chaos of the industry. Diana was cast as Dorothy, and suddenly Michael wasn't just admiring her from afar. He was sharing late nights on set, rehearsals, long hours under the same roof. It was the first time their lives moved in the same rhythm, and the closeness didn't go unnoticed. Rumors spread quickly when Diana was spotted staying at Michael's apartment during filming. No entourage, no cameras, just the two of them behind closed doors. Neither ever explained what truly happened, and perhaps that silence spoke louder than any admission could. Though the film itself was a commercial disappointment, the real story unfolded off-screen. Michael became more reflective, less eager to hide behind constant smiles, and those close to him noticed a calmness in his eyes. It wasn't romance in the traditional sense, but something equally powerful, the sense of finally being allowed to exist without performance, without pressure. Diana gave him that space. On screen, their chemistry was undeniable. When they sang Ease On Down the Road together, the joy in their voices carried something deeper, an invisible thread binding them. They weren't just acting, they were living a connection that had been building for nearly a decade. The Wiz may have failed at the box office, but for Michael, it was one of life's quiet victories. It gave him stolen moments with the one person who made him feel whole. And even if no one else knew the truth, those nights spent together in quiet conversation would become memories he carried for the rest of his life. By the early 1980s, Michael Jackson was no longer just a rising star. He was on the cusp of becoming a global phenomenon. Yet behind the glittering stage lights and the carefully rehearsed interviews, there was one truth he carried that he could no longer keep hidden. In 1982, during an Ebony magazine interview, he let that truth slip in a way that shocked even the reporter sitting across from him. The conversation had been light at first. full of polite smiles and safe answers. But then Michael's tone shifted. His voice dropped lower, trembling slightly as if he were finally allowing himself to step outside the image he had built for the world. And then, without hesitation, he said it. "It's Diana Ross. I love her." It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a vague deflection. He said it clearly, with a conviction that silenced the room. For years, fans had speculated about the nature of their bond, whispering about the way Michael looked at her, or how he always seemed to light up in her presence. But here he was, saying the words directly, not hiding behind metaphors or stage performances. He didn't stop there. Michael spoke of marriage, the idea that if the world were different, if age and circumstance didn't stand in the way, he would marry Diana without hesitation. To most, the thought seemed unthinkable. She was nearly 2 decades older, a legendary diva whose life seemed worlds apart from his. But to Michael, it didn't matter. The interview was published, and reactions were divided. Some dismissed it as youthful exaggeration. Others believed it was just another eccentric comment from a man known for mystery. But those who truly listened could hear the honesty in his voice. For Michael, it was perhaps the bravest moment of his career. Not a performance for millions, but a simple confession of love, uttered by a man who had been holding it in since the age of 9. In the mid-1980s, while Michael Jackson's career was soaring into superstardom, his personal world quietly crumbled with the arrival of one envelope. It wasn't a contract, not an award, but a simple wedding invitation. On the card, the bride's name read Diana Ross. The groom, Arne Næss Jr., a Norwegian businessman. For the rest of the world, it was cause for celebration. Fans and friends congratulated Diana on her new chapter, and the media covered the event like a fairy tale. But for Michael, the news struck like a silent blow. He didn't attend. He didn't send well wishes. He didn't even pretend to be happy for her. Instead, he withdrew into silence. Those closest to him recalled how different he became in those weeks. The usual warmth in his smile faded. Studio doors remained shut. Conversations ended with simple nods. And when someone finally asked him why he chose not to attend, his answer was short but unforgettable. "I loved her and always will." To the public, Michael was the king of pop, adored by millions. Yet, in that moment, he wasn't a global superstar. He was just a man confronted with the reality that the woman he had once confessed he wanted to marry was now promising her life to someone else. It wasn't anger. It wasn't bitterness. It was heartbreak in its quietest form, the kind that doesn't scream but lingers in every empty room. For Diana, life moved forward, as it should have. She was free to choose her own happiness. But for Michael, the wedding marked a turning point. It deepened the loneliness he had always carried, a reminder that the love he held so tightly might never be returned. Some loves are loud and celebrated. Others exist in silence, gnawing away in private. Michael's love for Diana belonged to the latter, and as the world applauded her wedding, he carried the weight of loving someone he could never truly have. If you're finding this story as powerful as we do, make sure you hit that subscribe button. There's so much more ahead you won't want to miss. Michael Jackson often said that his music carried truths he couldn't speak aloud. His stage persona might have been untouchable, but his songs revealed fragments of the man behind the glittering gloves. Among his vast catalog, 2 tracks in particular have fueled speculation for decades: Dirty Diana and Remember the Time. On the surface, Dirty Diana seemed like a scathing portrait of fame-hungry groupies. Michael himself once insisted it wasn't about any one person, just a type, but skeptics raised their eyebrows when they discovered a curious coincidence. The day Michael copyrighted the song lined up exactly with Diana Ross's wedding to Arne Næss Jr. Was it truly random, or was it Michael's way of pouring his heartbreak into music at the very moment she pledged herself to another man? Then came Remember the Time, a track far softer in tone but no less personal. Unlike the raw frustration of Dirty Diana, this song dripped with longing, a nostalgic look back at a love that felt magical yet unreachable. Jermaine Jackson later claimed outright that Michael wrote it for Diana, and watching the music video, where Michael plays a man trying to win the affection of an untouchable queen, the parallels feel almost too obvious to dismiss. Fans began connecting the dots: the timing, the lyrics, the emotion in his performances. When Michael sang Dirty Diana on stage, there was a sharpness in his voice, a clenched intensity as though the words carried more weight than just performance. And in Remember the Time, the softness in his delivery felt like a whispered question. Do you still think of me, even now? Michael never confirmed the truth. He left the meanings wrapped in ambiguity, just as he did with so many parts of his private life. But for those who listened closely, the message was clear. When he couldn't speak his love aloud, he carved it into melody. For most of his life, Michael Jackson lived behind walls of fame, of bodyguards, of carefully managed interviews. But in the early 1990s, a different Michael emerged in a series of private conversations recorded with a friend named Glenda. These tapes were never meant for the public, yet when they surfaced, they exposed a side of him few had ever seen. Vulnerable, honest, almost painfully human. In one moment of rare candor, Michael confessed that the relationship he held closest to his heart had been just in my head. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was crushing. For years, fans speculated about his bond with Diana Ross, whether it was romantic, whether she felt the same. But in that private admission, Michael revealed the truth. It was unrequited. A love carried quietly, never fully returned. Yet unreciprocated love doesn't simply disappear. Instead, it embeds itself deeper, transforming from a fleeting feeling into part of someone's very identity. At Neverland Ranch, tucked away from the public tours and amusement rides, was evidence of just how deeply Michael's devotion ran. Hidden inside was a small room many described as a personal shrine to Diana Ross. Her photos adorned the walls. Mementos linked to her were carefully placed, not for show, not for publicity, but for himself alone. To a man who could have had anyone, who lived under the adoration of millions, this private sanctuary told a different story, of someone who needed a quiet space to grieve, to remember, to hold on to a love that never left his heart. Some dismissed it as eccentricity, others saw it as proof, but for Michael it was neither. It was survival. Loving Diana silently, privately, became part of who he was. And though the world may have never fully understood, in that quiet room surrounded by her image, he allowed himself to keep loving without expectation. When Michael Jackson passed in 2009, the world mourned the loss of a legend. Fans searched for meaning in every detail of his life, looking for answers in the things he left behind. And among the legal documents, the most revealing clue wasn't about money, estates, or assets. It was a single name written in his will, Diana Ross. The clause was brief but powerful. If his mother, Katherine Jackson, could no longer care for his children, the responsibility would pass to Diana. Not to a sibling, not to a lifelong friend, not to business associates he had worked with for decades, but to her, the woman he had once described as mother, sister, and lover. To many, it was a shock. Why not entrust his children to family? Why Diana, someone with no legal or blood relation? But for Michael, the decision wasn't symbolic. It was deliberate. Naming someone in a will as guardian of your children is the ultimate act of trust. It isn't about sentiment. It's about who you believe will protect what matters most when you no longer can. Diana never made a public statement about the clause. She didn't confirm, deny, or seek attention from it. Her silence spoke volumes, as if honoring the private bond they shared without turning it into spectacle. Yet the inclusion of her name solidified what Michael's fans had always sensed, that her role in his life went far beyond friendship or mentorship. This wasn't a public performance or a veiled message in a song. It was a legal document, one of the most serious pieces of paper a person ever signs. And there, in black and white, Michael revealed what he had carried all along, that in his eyes, Diana Ross was family. For decades, Diana Ross kept silent about the whispers that followed her and Michael Jackson. She didn't confirm, didn't deny, and never allowed herself to be drawn into the rumors. To the public, her silence only deepened the mystery. But behind closed doors, as the years passed and her legendary career began to slow, Diana finally allowed herself to speak. At 81, with silver hair and a voice softened by time, she sat in a quiet room surrounded by family. There was no stage, no cameras, no intention of dramatics. Yet her words stunned those who heard them. "Michael loved me," she said, "loved me in a way that's not easy to name." At first, someone laughed nervously, thinking she must be joking. But Diana shook her head. This wasn't a fleeting crush, not some fantasy dreamed up by fans. It was real. She admitted that from the very first time Michael said those words, mother, sister, lover, he never once wavered. His devotion lasted a lifetime. And what about her feelings? When asked if she ever loved him the same way, Diana lowered her eyes to the cup of tea in her hands. She paused, then answered with brutal honesty. She cared for him deeply, more than most people could ever understand. But to love him as he loved her, she dared not lie. She couldn't. It wasn't rejection, nor dismissal. It was the acknowledgement of a love too fragile to ever be touched, one that could only exist in the quiet space between them. She admitted that her distance wasn't indifference, it was protection. Protection for Michael, and perhaps even for herself. For the first time, Diana's words confirmed what Michael had carried all his life. His love was real, and though it was not fully returned, it was respected, cherished, and remembered by the woman who had inspired it all. No photographs ever showed them hand in hand, and no kiss was ever caught on camera. Yet, when the fragments of their story are pieced together, the bond between Michael Jackson and Diana Ross is undeniable. It wasn't about public displays. It was about quiet devotion, carried in silence for decades. From the first time she bent down to call him sweetheart, Diana became more than a mentor. She was the anchor he leaned on, the person who gave him confidence when the world demanded perfection. And though Michael's feelings blurred the lines between admiration and love, he never wavered in his devotion. When she married, he withdrew into silence. When he sang Dirty Diana and Remember the Time, the echoes of his longing rang through every lyric. In private tapes he admitted the truth, it was one-sided. Yet he still kept a shrine to her at Neverland, and in his will he entrusted her with his children, the most profound gesture of trust he could make. Years later, Diana herself finally acknowledged it. Michael's love was real. She cared deeply, but she couldn't love him in the same way. And perhaps that was the quiet tragedy, a love too fragile, too complicated to ever exist openly. Theirs wasn't a fairy tale. It was something rarer, a lifelong devotion, unshaken by time, unspoken yet undeniable, a love that didn't need to be seen to be real.